Today is January 21st, 2024. It is episode 33 of the Internet Shell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I am joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over some changes in coaching at Ohio State, a couple of recruits, some NIL stuff, and then we'll hit a couple of the basketball headlines from Purdue to Illinois to Michigan State. So, Joe?
Yeah, I think it's quite the regime change in Columbus, and I say that because they got a lot of ex-Urban Meyer guys out of there, and I quite literally, Urban Meyer's son-in-law Corey Dennis was let go, which I found kind of surprising and somewhat questionable. He was the quarterbacks coach there and heavily involved in the passing game. I mean, Sean, when you think of Ohio State's offense in football, what's the first thing that comes to mind as a strength?
Elite wide receivers, quarterbacks, pros.
Yeah. So I found that kind of shocking just based on initial logical pass. And also you got to consider he did such a good job developing Justin Fields and CJ Stroud. And if you want to call Kyle McCord a failure, a guy who was top 10 in QB efficiency in the country, I really don't know what much else to say to you. Regardless, though, I think it's really interesting. Ryan Day said his hand would be even more off the play calling. He did also say that before the Georgia game, and I'm led to believe he had a heavy hand in that play calling, to his credit, since they should have won that game in 2022 and into this year, clearly. So Bill O'Brien is clearly the most experienced guy you could have to call plays, not only at this level, but at the highest level. So I think it's a net positive for the Buckeyes having another guy in there who's worked with, the Bryce Youngs of the world, the Tom Brady's, really made Matt McGloin at Penn State a pretty subpar quarterback, really good at times. And the 1 year with Christian Hackenberg was intriguing. I think if he stayed at Penn State longer from post 2013 when he took the Texans job, maybe Christian Hackenberg's career looks a little different. Now, we don't have time to speculate on that. But, Sean, I really thought that'd be the only other acquisition Ohio State would have in this cycle, but it turns out I was dead wrong about that. You want to tell us about what other questions we've got about them?
So before the NIL, Joe, they got a rather big name. I guess you can call him recruit. He was committed to Bama, never got there. I wouldn't expect him to start this year, but tell us more about this guy.
Is there in the same recruiting class. I don't really consider Sayin a transfer. I still consider him like an incoming freshman. I mean, it used to be college football signing day official, like the main one would be in February, but with early enrolling and all that, it's been moved earlier to December. So Sayin to me is more a 2024 kid, which is why the acquisition is even more shocking considering Aaron Nolan was kind of billed as much more. They already had Will Howard, Lincoln Keenholz, Devin Brown, and now you have Julian Sayin. Of those four, all four are probably expected to have their hat in the ring for a starting job. Now, two of the four aren't even going to have a hat in the ring for the backup job. So I don't want to speculate toward the middle of January, but I wouldn't be shocked if we saw one or two of those guys added there by the end of spring. Or I'd frankly be shocked if 50% of that QB room is back this time next year. I'll leave it at that. But certainly interesting for the Buckeyes. But to me, Sean, this indicated, I don't want to steal your other question, but I'm in turn going to have to answer it when saying this. Michigan's national title clearly lit a fire under some donors, places where you sit down, because they have never been this aggressive in the transfer portal before. Sure, they got guys like Justin Fields, and they've gotten guys in the portal like an offensive tackle from San Diego State last year. But this is a heavy, heavy, heavy acquisition, especially Caleb Downs, who I forgot to even touch on here. Alabama's leading tackler and five-star recruit who was probably going to go to Ohio State until he flipped to Bama very suddenly. So, they're adding like 5 or 6 immediate starters from the portal for next year. So I really think Ohio State's super aggressiveness and Michigan's national, I don't think it's any coincidence. I think after 3 straight losses, they're fed up. They really want to. I mean, they always want to beat Michigan, but now they're just taking a different approach. And we're still 10 months away from seeing if that ultimately.
In the air, whoever that will be, Ohio State have to be the favorites to win this conference next year at this point, from what we know now. Wouldn't you agree?
John, there's no question about it. I think a lot of people are in love with Oregon, and rightfully so. But the question, well, Dylan Gabriel's going to work out there. Replacing Bo Nix is no small order either. So I think Ohio State, they do have questions at quarterback, but they have so much else coming back around them that, you know, I bet the betting base will be in this sort of Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, just because Michigan only because of the defense and the returning national champions. So, with that said, Sean, anything short of a national title and beating Michigan failure, is that fair? No, but reasonability in the blue bloods of college football, especially among their fan bases, is not in high demand in 2024.
So, Joe, if I'm not mistaken, that's all we have for everybody for football. Before we move to basketball, I would just like to try and reset my internet here. Your audio's coming through okay, but we're dropping 96% of the frames for the YouTube. So for everyone, could just hang in there for a second while I reset my Wi-Fi. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there. Hopefully, this connection is better. It's telling me that it's better, so hopefully it's better for the listeners, too. So, Joe, that's kind of everything that we have for football. Obviously, not a ton. Not a ton, really, until spring games and quarterback battles and position battles and stuff like that. But if anything does come up, then we'll be sure to hit it. So, Joe, we're going to move into basketball now. And it's probably going to be a shorter show, definitely under 30 minutes, because we know everyone wants to get back to the football game. We're going to start with Purdue, Joe. They pick up 2 road wins this week, and they really start to separate themselves, or not actually at the top of the pack. They're still tied with Wisconsin, but they are definitely going to win this league by multiple games. They get a good win at Indiana, where that game was not close, and then they cruise to a win at Carver Hawkeye against Iowa yesterday. What are your thoughts on the Boilermakers week?
I think it's the Purdue we saw toward November, which was the machine-like, just get ahead and just stay ahead. And that's what they did at Indiana. I found that particularly impressive in that environment because it was rocking. I don't care that it was not close for most of the game. It was still, Indiana was always 2 baskets away from the place coming completely alive and Purdue perhaps collapsing like they've done in the past. But, no, the combination of that and beating 2 really different stylistically teams, one team with a great defense, another with no defense but a phenomenal offense. I think that's really good news for Purdue. They're improving because game to game, the Big Ten, the styles aren't way, way too different. But in terms of Indiana to Iowa, especially on the road, that's a really hard transition from focusing one game plan on Indiana to another on Iowa. So really good for Purdue. I think that could help them come March in terms of practice, like a few days between those. But other than that shot, it's really just more about, I think it was a really bad missed chance for Indiana, not in terms of, just not winning the game, but, not even looking competitive through most of it. And then it was pretty brutal this week for the Hoosiers. Do you want to comment on that before we talk too much about Purdue?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can close out the Purdue talk. I mean, they're really good. Edey's had 33 straight games. But I do want to turn it over to this Indiana game because I was really disappointed in how it went. The foul trouble was one thing, and a couple of those calls were, frankly, pretty soft. But Purdue does that to every team. And, Woodson called out Khalil Ware for not playing hard in the postgame and saying that he thought he could have done better against Zach Edey. Well, Joe, Zach Edey was 11 for 23 from the field. I thought Ware did a pretty good job defensively, and that's as bothered as Zach Edey has looked on a couple of those close shots as I think we've seen him this year. And anything about that?
No, Sean, I just think it was probably frustration on Woodson's part. I think Woodson looked at the and probably realized that he talked out of his rear end. But if I'm an Indiana fan, Sean, to answer the greater question, I don't think I'd be way too worried. I certainly wouldn't be happy about how this week went. But you played the top two teams in the Big Ten, especially one on the road. I do think, this coming stretch is really important. Luckily, they have a week off in between to figure it out because certainly a lot to buckle up and maybe some stuff off the court. I think the wear thing, maybe that was a lingering issue from practice. I wouldn't know too much. That could be just a shot in the dark. But, a lot to figure out for Indiana, but certainly not even close to dead yet.
Yeah, in this game, Ware didn't play great on the offensive end, had just 5 points and 6 rebounds, but he only played 26 minutes because of foul trouble, so it's not as if he, I thought he did an okay job on Edey. He blocked him a couple times. He forced him to miss a couple shots, but, Edey ends up with 33 because he goes perfect from the free throw line, or no, sorry, not perfect, 11 of 12, and he takes 23 shots. If you take those 35 combined shots, you're probably going to score 30. So, we can talk about this more in the offseason, Joe, but before we move on, I think we both agreed that Indiana would take some time for the chemistry to sit in, and it's just not at this point. The system doesn't really work without 2 All-Americans, and it doesn't work. And I think we agreed that they were probably a guard short coming into the season, even with Xavier Johnson playing to his level, and he has not done that yet. So, that we could probably dedicate a whole episode in the summer to, the direction of IU basketball under Woodson and this offensive philosophy. But any quick thoughts on those?
No, I think, based on that comment, we're going to have to be doing that about both our respective programs.
Yeah. And I think, Joe, if we can combine Michigan and Indiana here, clearly both of our teams are not very good. They've shown good moments. But Michigan and Indiana have enough good players to be better than what they're showing right now. I mean Kamala and Doug McDaniel are all-league players. And for Indiana, Malik Reneau is a future Big Ten Player of the Year if he sticks around and the guy from Purdue leaves. And, Trey Galloway is a good player, and Mackenzie Mbako is a 5-star recruit. So it's just not working for either of our teams right now, and there's enough data to more than half of the season is over. To turn around numbers in your season, you're going to have to show something that you haven't up until this point, and we've got less than 2 months until Selection Sunday. So the other big headline of the weekend, Joe, was earlier today. It was Terrance Shannon Jr. returning to the fold for Illinois after getting his court order, injunction, or whatever it is called, approved. So he will be back. It appears temporarily, but great news for the Illini as they rolled the Scarlet Knights from Rutgers today.
Yeah, Sean, in terms of a team that had as big of a turnaround of a week as Illinois, I don't know who could really compete with that. Maybe Michigan State. Getting off that, they lose last Sunday to Maryland at home. Really bad loss. We're only up by 1 at Chrysler on Thursday night, but ever since the tip-off, that ball was inbound in the second half of Chrysler, can't think of a team that's had a better week than Illinois based on where it started. And I'm going to be honest with you, Sean. I don't think they played particularly well in the 2 games this week. It kind of just shows that if you play solid enough basketball, Illinois doesn't miss free throws. They don't turn the ball over way too much. And when Coleman Hawkins is on, they out-rebound most teams, especially out-rebounding Michigan isn't that hard. And they just play the fundamentals right. They can beat probably 8 out of the 14 teams in this league. No matter where the game's played, they'll beat them without the major mistakes and stupid turnovers.
Yeah, if you look at the box score against Rutgers today, you'll see that Illinois was 6 of 27 from 3, that's 22%, and 16 of 27 from the free throw line. Those 2 numbers, you would not assume a 23-point victory. But There it is. Terrance Shannon was 4 of 10 from the field, 0 of 5 from 3 today. 16 points because he made his free throws. So I think that the margin of error for this Illinois team is really high. And with Shannon back, they lengthen their rotation a little bit. Without him, they're really, really short. They don't have much depth. Dane Danger doesn't give them much off the bench. But it was pretty much 7 and now 8 with Shannon back. So he didn't start today. We'll see where it goes. Maybe he comes in for Luke Goody. But, a lot to be excited about for Illinois. And Wisconsin, Illinois, Purdue. You'd have to be pretty surprised if those teams don't finish in the top 3 at the end of the year.
Yeah, Sean, even with Wisconsin's slip up, which, again, it seems like a lot of teams are having this slip up in Happy Valley since 2019. It's like kind of a bad thing to do to lose there now. It's not even all that loud or crazy. It's I really think it's something psychological. That's probably another off-season episode we don't need to ramble on now. But no, Wisconsin and Illinois are similar in that their margin for error is pretty big against, I'd say, 80% of teams in this league, and it's shown based on their record. So, Sean, where do we go next?
We got one more topic, Joe, and it's about the Michigan State Spartans. They get the job done today on the road at Maryland, 61-57. This game was not close for a little bit, and then at the end, suddenly it became very close. Spartans led by 12 at halftime, 44-32, but they really struggled from the field in the second half. They only had 14 points until about 30 seconds left when Tyson Walker hit a dagger 3, which ended up putting it out of reach. But the Spartans don't play particularly well on the road. They turn over the ball. Never mind. I saw 14. That's the personal fouls, not the turnovers. They didn't turn over the ball. They got out-rebounded by 15, but at the end of the day, they still pick up a Big Ten road win. Are Michigan State starting to creep up into that spot that they find themselves a lot, probably 4th or 5th in the Big Ten this year and 7-8 seed come tournament time?
I really think this has to be the turning point. We waited for it all year. I understand the Baylor game and the blowout and all that, and that was great, but I think this was their best win of the year. Their most important win of the year. Prior to this, Sean, they had not won, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they won a Big Ten road game this year before this game, right? Yeah, no, I'm completely correct. So, MSU dominated the first half. I want to make that crystal clear. Maryland surged back into the game, and kind of like the Nebraska game, you thought, oh, well, this is where MSU's going to implode and just rely on Tyson Walker and no one else is going to contribute. And the exact opposite happened. Timely basket after timely basket. Really a balanced scoring effort from Michigan State. Trey Holloman made an impact too. So, if you're MSU, this has to be encouraging. Tyson Walker didn't even play all that well. 5 of 14 for his standards, I'm talking. So, with that said, I think your season's completely turned around if you beat Wisconsin, a team that's already beaten you at the Breslin. You have 5 days in between games. I certainly think that game's going to be down to the wire. I think Michigan State has turned a quarter, and even if they lose that game, it's not a huge deal by any stretch of the imagination. And I'll tell you this, win or lose against Wisconsin, I think the Tuesday, January 30th game at home against Michigan might be one of the bloodiest, ugliest Michigan State basketball games we've seen since probably 2000 when Mateen Cleaves' team, the national title MSU team, I think beat Michigan by like 40 points, scored 105. So, yeah, if you're a Michigan State fan, I think you're a lot more excited about your Spartans than you were, even 2 episodes ago.
I think it really started with their loss at Illinois, if that makes sense. I thought they played very well in that game, and that game really could have gone either way. And, that seemed to be like the typical Izzo teams putting in that kind of vintage performance on the road and being really hard to beat. Then they rattle off 2 home wins, and then they won an ugly road game, which is a great sign for them. They, like you said, you previewed their games coming up, but to me, it seems like they're going to get that 4th spot, if I did have to guess right now. Because, I posted the Big Ten standings after yesterday's game, so their games today are not counted in it, but nobody other than the top three teams that we mentioned has 2 losses or less. You got Northwestern at 4-3, Nebraska, IU, Michigan State at 4-4, and Ohio State, Iowa, and Minnesota at 3-4. So Michigan State's already there. They're already right there, and I would guess that they're going to get this 4th spot at this point, but still a long way to go. Obviously, great news. To win on the road, you got to have somebody else other than your first 2 options show up, and Holloman did that for them today. They don't win that game without him, and they move on to a game at Wisconsin where they'll be ready to play. So, Joe, we're just going to look forward here to the next few games because not much else to talk about in the Big Ten. Not many good games this week, to be honest. You do have one on Wednesday, Illinois at Northwestern, BTN, 9 o'clock Eastern. This seems like a big game for both teams. And Northwestern in that 4th spot right now. If they want it, they probably need to get this W.
Yeah, Sean, I think a rivalry game, and this is going to be the game where Terrance Shannon's going to be fully integrated back into the squad. So, assuming nothing else happens crazy, and it's also a good measuring stick for Northwestern. This would be 22 days to the day where Illinois absolutely hammered them at State Farm Arena. So, and that was the first game without Terrance Shannon, I might mention, too, creating them by 30. I think Northwestern and that crowd is going to be aware of that, and they're going to have to play an inspired game, which I think they to beat the Illini. The only other game, Sean, worth mentioning on my part before I turn it over to you is probably just the Michigan State-Wisconsin game. Wisconsin-Minnesota may be an interesting game. If you're into, your grandma like falling down the steps and like really sickening like beatdowns, Michigan and Purdue is on Tuesday, but you'd have to pay $4.95 a month or whatever it is for Peacock to watch that. Here are the blowouts and non-competitiveness and discrepancies. Michigan Purdue's your game on Tuesday night at 9. But Sean, I'm going to turn it right back over to you.
Yeah, you mentioned that Minnesota game, Joe. It is a big opportunity for them. I think they've definitely been impressive so far this year. They really played pretty well at the Izzone, I thought, and they ended up losing by 10. But I think under 8 it was tied or something like that. But this is a big game for them. They have nobody expiring their eligibility this year, so if they do happen to want to move on from Ben Johnson, they're going to lose all those players when they could just copy and paste them to next year probably. So if they see enough improvement from him, they might be able to bring back kind of the same team, and that will be a good thing for Minnesota. Dawson Garcia is a really good player, but other than that, they seem to be finding their way, and I think at least at this point, they may not avoid Wednesday, but they're definitely a tougher team than we initially thought at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, one of the surprise teams, and I'll just make this analogy. I think Ben Johnson could be this year's Fred Hoiberg, where, maybe you're not competitive enough to make the tournament, but I think you're competitive enough to make enough noise and to give the athletic director a long and troubled sleep the night before decision day, whatever that might be.
So, Joe, I think that's all we have from today. Let people get back to this football game that's about halfway through the 3rd quarter. Try and do another episode this week, but again, not much in the football world, and only a couple of good basketball games. So, Joe, I think we'll leave it here, and we'll see him next time. So, thank you everybody for listening, and be sure